morning is our second lesson on dealing with. It is a lesson from the Old Testament, from the book of Exodus. The lesson is entitled, When Life is Expendable. And it is a very familiar story of, from the, if y'all grew up in the church like I did, you were taught the story of Moses. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning, and how that story gives us an understanding of life in modern society. Over the last 30 or 40 years, let me say that, human life has really not been valued very much. Ever since Roe versus Wade, that Supreme Court ruling in the 1970s, and we had legalized abortion, millions of human beings have been put to death. And it is just heartbreaking when you hear the numbers. And as our lesson is going to show this morning, we don't know what those individuals would have contributed to society. So, that aborted child could have been a Mozart, or could have been an Einstein, or could have been a Billy Graham. We just don't know. So, we don't put a premium on human life today like we did even 50 years ago. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and let's look at our passage. We're going to be looking at Exodus 1, verses 16, 17. Then we're going to skip over to Exodus 2. Just as a little history, Exodus starts with the children of Israel no longer being favored nation status in Egypt. If you remember Genesis ends with Joseph having his family come, having privileged status, and given their own land, and they settle in the land of Goshen and start to raise families and work and prosper. And through the generations, we now come to a Pharaoh who doesn't know that history. And as a result, he is starting to fear the size of the Israelite nation. If we back up just a little bit from our verses of 16 and 17, he took it upon himself. He decided that since the Israelites were so large that they may combine with another foreign power, and with that military might challenge the Egyptians. So his first plan of attack was, I'm going to work these folks to death. And if I work them hard enough, maybe I'll get rid of a whole bunch of them, and that'll reduce the population, and that'll solve my problem. That plan, that's plan A, failed. And what we're going to look at this morning is plan B. So let's look at Exodus 1, verses 16 and 17, and I read, when you help the Hebrew women, and this is the Pharaoh talking. He is talking to the midwives of the Israelis. When you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him. If it's a daughter, she may live. So this is his plan B to reduce the population of the Israelites. Now, why do you think it would be the males he killed instead of the females, or why did he just kill all the babies?
The males could grow up to be soldiers.
Exactly. The men, are the ones who would learn how to fight and have weapons. But is there something here that this Pharaoh doesn't seem to be thinking about? If he kills off the men who are going to be soldiers, what is he doing to his own dynasty? Who's doing all the building in Egypt? Who's building the temples, and who's building the pyramids, and who's building the roads? So, sometimes when we think of a plan, it sounds good, but if we don't think it through, it can cause more damage down the road than what he's thinking about. So he has decided to do this. And 15, he's talking to just 2 midwives. Do you think those 2 midwives take care of the whole Israelite nation? Couldn't possibly, could they? So what the text seems to think is these 2 women were like the head of a union or the head of a guild, or were kind of the lead ones who did all the training. And he spoke to them. And was this a request, or do you think this was a demand?
I think it was a command.
I think this was probably a command. Pharaoh was worshipped as a god, and he didn't make requests. When he wanted something done, he just came out and said, okay, this is what you need to do. And when you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. The child is a son, kill it. But if it's a daughter, she may live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So we look at this text. What caused them not to do what what the Pharaohs told them to do? The belief in God. And was it just the belief?
It was fear.
It was fear. But in the context of the Old Testament, what does the word fear mean here? Respect and devotion and a reverence for. So they had a reverence for the one true God, and when they had to choose between what man says or what God says, what did they choose? They chose what God says. Now, when we think of the New Testament and New Testament Christians, are we to do the same thing? Yes. You look at Paul's letters and look at Peter's letters. Do they tell us to honor and respect authority? They do, but with one exception. When the authorities contradict God, you got to go with God. And we see that in our modern society today. We look at the New Testament, when Peter and John, after Jesus rose and they were preaching, what did the Pharisees call them in and tell them not to do? Remember?
Told them to quit preaching.
Told them to quit preaching. And what did they tell them? Told them, no, we're not. If we got to choose between God and you, we're going to choose God. And in our modern society today, we don't normally have to make that choice. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we live in a free society, and we don't come to that point where we got to choose between God and government. But with society becoming more and more secular every single day, there may come a point in time where we may have to make that decision. And how sad would it be if you chose the government?
Not this government.
When you look at the history of the church, especially in the first 300 years of the church, severe persecution in the church. And people had to make that decision. Am I going to die as a martyr and live as a Christian? Or I'm going to deny the faith and just go on about my life? And lots of folks in the early part of the church chose to go on about their life. As a matter of fact, one of the big controversies in the 3rd century was whether or not to allow these people who denied the faith to come back into the church. Well, lots of folks who said, if you deny the faith, you don't belong in the church. Now, they overcame that, because is there anything that you can't be forgiven for? So, if you had a weak moment and fell away, certainly you can repent, and God is going to forgive you. So, but that situation, is likely at some point in the future to give us some reasons to pause, because we're seeing, secular society trying to drive religion, and especially Christianity, out of the public square. And if we look at the verse when Pharaoh comes back to the midwives and says, "Why aren't the babies being killed?" Do you remember what they told him?
Yeah, they can't get there quick enough.
Said they're really strong and they don't need midwives, so we're not around when they deliver. So the question there becomes, is it okay to lie?
That's the truth.
Well, we say that no. If we look at the New Testament, Jesus told the truth even when it caused him personal pain. Remember, before the Pharisees and before Pilate, they asked him, "Are you the Son of God?" And very easily could have lied and said, "No, they just made that title up for him." So he told the truth regardless of the consequences. But if we look in the Old Testament, this is not the first time that this has happened. Samuel stretched the truth, Jeremiah stretched the truth, and look what happened, to these midwives. They told a lie, and what did God do to them? Did he punish them?
I think they did.
No, he blessed them.
Oh.
He blessed them and said, y'all will have children too because of the things that you've done. So we're kind of in a, I don't like gray areas. I like things to be black and white. But here we have a gray area. Now, with that said, how do we know what's a sin against God in the Old Testament? What identifies sin for God in the Old Testament?
I used to think that it was, when I was growing up, that it was just anything that did not please God.
Well, it certainly is. Anything that goes against God is certainly a sin. But we have specific items that were identified as sins. And what is that called? What is that list of things called? And the Ten Commandments and the law of Moses, right? So was that in effect here? No, Moses ain't even born yet. So we don't have the law of Moses. We don't have the Ten Commandments. So we're really under the natural law, not the identified law, because until something's identified as a sin, it's not really a sin. That's how we know God doesn't want us to lie. That's how we know not to put other gods before him. That's how we know not to covet, because he identified all that in the law of Moses. So this is one of those gray areas where we can say they did the proper action and God blessed them for it. Let's look at our couple of things that we want to see here. What is the I guess the irony of this situation in respect to the Pharaoh and in respect to the Israelites?
You don't understand the question.
Okay, let me put it to you this way. The Pharaoh already had one plan that failed. Okay, now he has to come up with a second plan. Okay, his first plan depended on his action and the action of the Egyptians. Now, that didn't work. Now, his second plan, his plan B, depended on the action of who?
Israelite.
The Israelite women. Now, if you want to get rid of a group of people, are you going to go to the people you're trying to get rid of to help you? That's kind of a strange request, isn't it? Now, even if he has the power to command them, think about what he's asking them to do. I'm asking the people that I'm going to kill to do the killing. Very strange request, isn't it? Now, with that said, is there anything that man can do to thwart the plan of God?
Someone said no.
No. You know, God's plan is going to go forward regardless of how evil tries to stop it. And God had a plan for the deliverance of the Israelites. And this is just the start of that plan. But even though we have this evil here, it's not going to interfere with God's plan. Now, let's kind of take that scenario over to the New Testament. Did we have an instance in the New Testament that was very similar to this? Right in the beginning of Matthew. Remember what King Herod said to do? Kill all the children under the age of 2. And what was he trying to do?
Kill Jesus.
He was trying to kill Jesus. Did that evil stop God's plan of salvation?
No.
No. No. Evil cannot overcome God. Doesn't change God's plan. God's plan and God's promises are going to be fulfilled just the way he wants them to. Now, we don't always understand, why there's evil in the world, why evil does the things that it does, but we do know that God's plan is going to move forward, even if we don't understand what's going to happen. Let's skip over to verses 22 and 23. Pharaoh then commanded all his people, "You must throw every son born of the Hebrews into the Nile, but let every daughter live." So plan A was he was going to work them to death. Didn't work. Plan B, he was going to let the Israelites, women, kill the babies. Didn't work. Now we're on plan C, and he's going to get the Egyptians to throw the babies in the Nile. Is evil persistent?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Since the beginning of the world, evil is not going to stop. There's always going to be evil in the world. And it's just going to move forward and move forward. And why is that so?
Because we let it.
Well, we let it, but do we really have a choice? I mean, can we let it or not let it?
No, it's not Satan.
That's the word I'm looking for. It's Satan's world, right? Sin came into the world and corrupted the world, and this is Satan's domain. And everything he can do to continue to corrupt the world, he's going to do. And that's not going to change. That's not going to go away.
That's
But-
kind of contradictory to saying God is in control, though.
Well, let's think about a story in the Old Testament where the devil is doing something, but God is in control. Can you think of one? Job. What did the devil say to God? He's so good because you're favoring him. Quit favoring him and let me have my way, and we'll just see how he is. So what did God do? He let him do it, right? God's in control, but that doesn't stop evil from happening, even to good people. So, and what did Job's friends say to him?
Just curse God and die.
Curse God, or you must have done something wrong. You need to repent because you're being punished for doing something wrong. Not the case, was it? He didn't do anything wrong. A man of God still had troubles. And in the end, he came out all right. In the New Testament, when we have troubles, whether it's because of some situation, that we cause, or some situation that's beyond our control, why does God allow that to happen?
Testing.
He's testing us. He's testing us. And why does he test us?
To make us stronger.
To make us strong, to build up our faith, right? So our attitude needs to be, we're going to put our trust in God. Whether it's good or bad, we're going to follow God's plan. We're going to follow God's will for us, and we're going to overcome whatever challenge that we have. So Pharaoh commanded his people, throw every son born to the Hebrews into the Nile, but let every daughter live. Now, a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Who were the Levites?
The priestly.
That was the priestly tribe. So was that the case in this situation? Were the Levites the priests here in our context this morning? No, because the tribes weren't given duties until after the Exodus out of Egypt. So, but Moses, who's the writer of the book of Exodus, letting us know, what his background was. Now, do we know the name of this man and woman?
Jochebed and Amram.
Jochebed and Amram, absolutely. If y'all watch the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, you'd know that. So, him and her. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. Just a little side note that's not in our text. Do you know the relationship of Jochebed to Amram? Jochebed was Amram's father's sister. He married his aunt. So that's just a little side note. You'll see that as you go over a couple of chapters, and they're given a genealogy of the tribes of Levi. So I don't really know what that has to do with the lesson, but I thought I'd throw that in and give you a little side note. So a family married a Levi. A woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Now, would that be typical of what most women would do when they have a baby and they think the baby's in danger? I think so. I mean, we look at our text and we see that this mother is going to do everything she can to protect this child. Typical, right? Now, is it significant that the child was beautiful? Think about that from the text of, suppose the child wasn't beautiful. Suppose the child wasn't deformed or was deformed. Would she have reacted the same way?
I think so.
Absolutely. I mean, she's committed to this child. And I think if we think about it in the context of our modern society, how many women don't have this? About 1 million or so a year who abort their fetuses before they ever know if the child is beautiful or not. Scary thought, isn't it? Same way here. This woman could have said, I'm pregnant, but they're going to kill the child anyway, so no point in me having it.
This brings up something that bothers me really, really bad. Some of these babies, if they let them live, they don't have bad luck.
Maybe,
They're gonna have a family, maybe.
maybe.
Probably not no baby in it, some of them don't have it because they don't have a family, they're not wanted, they're gonna be trashed, they're gonna be on the street, nobody's gonna love them and look at them.
But
I can see where some folks would say, get rid of them.
but
And that's-
isn't that an interesting conversation when we decide a person's worth based on what we think their standing in society is going to be? We put a value on a human being based on what might happen to them. So look at this context here. This group of people were in slavery. There was no hope that this child would be anything other than in a mud pit making bricks. That's what they had to look forward to. And that's assuming he got to live. Or in this particular case, why should I have this child? It's going to be killed anyway.
But he's precious in God's sight, and the mother,
Is
beautiful no matter what they look like.
every child precious in the sight of God, regardless of what their standing in the community is?
Yes. Or what their mental.
Or what their mental or physical capacity is? How is it that we put our standard on God's possession?
It's just selfish, I think.
We rationalize the killing of a human soul.
I think it's evil.
What about the idea of somebody who is old and not useful anymore, and the children decide, well, I just don't want to take care of them. I think we probably need to take them somewhere and get them killed.
I don't like that idea.
I don't like that idea either, because I'm pretty old. So I kind of hope my kids will kind of take care of me when I get to that point. But is that not our society today? If you're not useful, if you can't contribute to society, you're not worth anything. And how sad is that? Do we rationalize the person on the street who doesn't have a lot of money, is not worth finding a home for?
You have to look at them and say, God loves them.
God loves everybody. And it's incumbent upon us to tell people that God does love them. We can't solve all the problems in the world, but I don't think that's any reason to dehumanize people because of what their standing is, or because of they have a deformity, they don't have any money, or whatever it is that we place on them. So, and certainly in this case, this child had nothing to look forward to. But when she could know, why did she hide him for 3 months? Any idea there? All you mothers ought to know this. Come on now.
Because the cries get louder.
In the beginning, it's easier to keep a child quiet, just snuggle them a little bit, and but the older they get, the more they demand, right? You get those 1 o'clock in the morning feedings and 4 o'clock in the morning feedings, and and all this other stuff that goes with a baby. And of course, the longer that child is in her home, the more somebody is going to find out about it. So, she probably nursed the child long enough so that she felt comfortable that he could survive for a little while on his own. And then what'd she do? Made the decision to do something else, didn't she? So let's look at verse 3. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. So she made the choice to save this child. Now, as we go through the story, do you think she had an idea of where to place this child?
Sure.
I think so. I think so. You just wouldn't take a 3-month or 4-month-old baby and stick it in a basket and shove it out in the river.
The alligator.
Well, exactly. Or the basket would turn over, or whatever the case may be. You just would have a plan of what to do. So, and certainly, making this basket and making it secure the way she did, she was not trying to throw this baby away. She had a plan to save this child.
She had her daughter check on her.
She had her daughter follow. And who was the daughter here? You know? Miriam, absolutely. So which goes back to, when we first look at this text, when we talk about a man and a woman having a child, this wasn't their first child, was it? You know which number this was? Number 3, because there was Miriam, the oldest child, and then who was next? Aaron, his older brother, who was probably about 3, and then comes Moses. So the text is a little confusing, and we think, well, we see a brand new couple with a brand new baby. Well, not really the case. And isn't it interesting that Aaron, who's the survivor here, was born during Plan B? So you had the first time he tried to get the midwife to get rid of a child, this mother saved number 2 child, and here she is with number 3 child, once again trying to save the child. So did God's plan carry through from Plan B to Plan C? Yeah, because did God have a plan for Aaron?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember what that plan was?
Spokesperson for Moses.
Spokesperson. Remember when God called Moses and God said, well, Lord, I just can't talk. I'm not very good. I'm not, all these excuses. And God finally said, that's not a problem. I got Aaron here. He'd take care of that. So God had a plan for Aaron, just like he did for Moses. First time they killing babies couldn't stop God's plan. Second time they were killing babies can't stop God's plan. God's plan is going to carry through. So she placed the basket, in the reeds by the bank of the Nile, then turned it over to the daughter. Now, as we look at some of the things we can get out of this text, even during time of trials and difficulties, is God always working to accomplish a larger plan that we don't understand?
Yes.
I think so. And think about the New Testament, and the church. Think about the history of the church. It was founded, expanded during our Bible times up until about the beginning of the 2nd century. And from that, apostolic fathers were all gone. And it continued to expand up until the point of Constantine, who declared the Christian religion the religion of the empire. And then for almost 700 years, we had the Dark Ages, where there was really no scriptures other than in monasteries, very few churches where the gospel was being preached, a lot of heresies in the church. But yet, look at today. Is the text that the apostles wrote in the 1st century the same as the text that we have today? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. As you go back and look at the history of all the writings of the New Testament and all the ancient texts, what we're reading and studying was what they gave the church in the first 70 years of the church. Now, how amazing is that? Did God have a plan for his church?
Yes.
Did God have a plan for the Word of God?
Yes.
Yes. And no amount of evil is going to stop that. Now, when we think about God's plan for the rest of the age, what is God's plan for the rest of the age?
Same as it was.
Same as it was,
Never
but
changed.
what's going to happen at the end of the age? Christ is coming back. Is anything that man does going to stop that?
No.
No. You know, if God tells us in his word that Jesus is going to return, no amount of denying it or beating around the bush or saying it ain't so, nothing's going to stop that plan. And when we live our lives and we're dealing with evil and we're dealing with terrible people, our hope is that that occurrence is going to take place tomorrow. I mean, that's what we hope for. That's what I hope for. That'd be okay with me if he comes back, you know, this afternoon before I go to lunch.
As long as we're ready.
As long as we're ready. And I hope everybody sitting here, or everybody who's listening online is ready. Because he tells us we have assurance of being ready and tells us how being ready is, what it means. So we can't get discouraged because we don't understand what the plan of God is. Let's go over and look at our last group of verses. Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe at the Nile while her servants walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, sent her slave girl, took it, opened it, and saw him, the child. And there he was, a little boy crying. She felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." So we see the mother had a plan because she had this child in a basket with somebody looking out for him. She just didn't stick it in the reeds and leave. And if we think about the text, and she placed the basket in the reeds in a specific spot, do you think most of the people along the Nile knew where this woman would come to bathe? I mean, this was probably one of the 2 or 3 most famous people in the whole country. So she put the basket where it could be found. A very, strategic plan. And look at the reaction of this woman, this daughter. Now, what should her reaction have been? What should it have been? Just, take the baby out of the basket and throw it in the river, right? Was that the command of Pharaoh? That's what he told all the Egyptians. And she clearly, look at the text, she clearly knew it was a Hebrew baby. Well, we don't know, but she thought this is one of the Hebrew boys. So she knew, that her father had commanded all the babies to be thrown in the river, but yet look at her response. She had compassion. Now, think about that as we move back into our New Testament age. What is that having compassion here? How does that relate to us in the New Testament?
Jesus having compassion on us.
Jesus have compassion on us, and how should we respond to that?
Have compassion on others.
Have compassion on other people. Now, when we have compassion on other people, is it other people that look like us?
No.
See, that, as Jesus said, it's easy to love people who are lovable. Not so easy to have compassion on people who are different from us. People with a deformity. People who are poor. People who have diseases. People who live in the ghetto.
Different races.
Different races. See, this woman had privilege. She had everything. Yet because she had compassion on somebody less fortunate than her, of a different race, tells us, as an example, we need to be careful how we think about those less fortunate than us.
Don't you find it kind of strange or really unusual that she knew it was a Hebrew child and her daddy must know it was a Hebrew child?
Well, probably so. And in the text, it talks about that a lot of male children were taken as slaves and brought into royal households and trained up to be servants. Do we have examples of that other places in the Old Testament?
Joseph.
Joseph? What about Daniel and his friends? So not unusual to have that. And because of the circumstances of this being his daughter, his daughter could have said, this make a great, whatever. And probably would have been because she had privilege, right? But doesn't stop the fact that she saw this child who she was supposed to kill and had compassion on him. Then look what happened. The little girl came running up and said, hey, let me help. I got a solution to this problem. And of course, went and got the mother. And looking at that, what did the mother, what did the Pharaoh's daughter do here? Not only did she give the child back to this woman, but what did she do? She paid her. She paid her wages to take care of this child.
She was either very naive or very smart.
Well, could have been both. She could have been naive or she could have been smart. We don't know. I like to think she was pretty smart because he grew up to be quite famous. So, but once again, we see, did this just happen? Was this just happenstance that it did? No. As we've talked about in some of our other lessons, this was God intervening in the affairs of the world. See, there's a lot of people who think God sits up there in heaven and things just go on, and our idea is we worship him, but he's really not involved in what goes on in the world. He's involved in everything. Even the little things. And that's what we've got to keep in mind. The biggest problem we have is we just don't understand. And of course, there's no way for us to understand. But he's involved. What's the biggest way he's involved in the world today?
Savior.
What?
Savior.
He sent his Savior to die on, his Son to die on the cross so that we could be saved. Is that still going on today?
Yes.
That wasn't a one-time thing, was it? Happened in the first century, and it's happened every century since then, and it's going to continue all the way till Jesus comes again. How much more should we be appreciative of God being involved in the world than giving us the ability to have a relationship with him? He made us righteous through his grace, not for what we did. We didn't have to save babies. We don't have to feed the poor. All these things that are great things to do, we don't have to do to have God's grace. God gave that to us freely. And what a magnificent thing that he chooses to be involved in the world so that we can have that salvation.
It's really mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? Mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Grover, you want to close us out, please, sir?
Heavenly Father,